Before we take a breather and bring through our next issue, are you stressed in respect of all your cleaning needs? Well, worry no more. Dan's World Services is your one-stop shop that meets all your commercial and residential cleaning needs, from pest control, janitorial and house cleaning, event cleaning and waste management, carpet and sofa cleaning, and more. Whether at home or at work, we understand and know how haptic cleaning can be coupled with your busy lifestyle. So all you have to do, we've got great news for you. Dan's World Environmental and Facility Management Services has got you covered. We excel in whatever we do, leaving you beyond expectation. Locate us at Excel House opposite Reggie Manuel Estate, Nungwa Barrio. Call us on these numbers: 0302 905 538 or 0555 752 361. Dan's World Services, beyond expectation. We take a breather. We'll return with some more action right up next. Do stay. Well, that was seen through the eyes of the Fulbe or Fulani and the Dagomba people as well. And it's also seeking to bring to bear the issue of how migration and others are impacting different levels. Climate change, I believe, and others are reshaping the lives of people in the West African sub-region. Well, joining me in the studio to actually expand on this matter, we have Joyce Nyame. She is Programs Manager of the Youth Bridge Foundation. And on Zoom, we have a Senior Research Fellow with the Center for Climate Change and Sustainability Studies at the University of Ghana, Dr. Yao Aanu Bafo. Let me start from the studio first. Joyce, good morning.
Good morning.
Good to have you join the conversation. And now let me go on Zoom. Dr. Bafo, good morning to you. If you can hear me, please unmute. Dr. Bafo, good morning. All right, we'll try to get back to Dr. Bafo as and when it is possible. But Joyce, for starters, what motivated this documentary? I know it was put together by the Youth Bridge Foundation, yes, together with your collaborators. Yes. Who are your collaborators, and what motivated this?
Okay, good morning, everyone. We had support from WANEP and also the Danish Embassy. Okay. The motivation for this documentary was to put in a format that most especially policymakers and young people can understand how climate change is impacting on our lives, and also how, as you had mentioned, there are other things that we need to pay attention to when we are addressing certain issues.
I see. I'm curious, why the Fulbe, why the Fulani and the other groups, the Dagomba that you selected? What went into selecting these two groupings? The Fulbe, I understand, because of the migratory activity, though some are here. But what went into that?
So let me just clear this. As the documentary has stated, we focus on these group of people as one of the categories of the marginalized people, but we are using them as case study to expand the conversation on how especially young people are marginalized when it comes to the issue of, in this relation, peace, security, and also elections. So we did research, and we understood that the underlying factors of exclusion and marginalization, one of the issues is climate change. And we have to delve deep into why climate change is affecting people. So we realized that most people, as the documentary has said, are forced to migrate from their original locations. And this affects identities, this affects resource management and other things. And it's also curtail into certain things that we try to prevent as a nation. So that's the reason why we had to bring up this documentary, in trying to have an open discussion. And as I have said, the food base is just one category of the people we want to use as case study, not strictly only on the food base.
Now, climate change, how much of a problem is it vis-a-vis what we are discussing? Because people are migrating. That comes with so many positives and negatives. Of course, it's the negatives we don't want. But how much of an impact is climate change having on some of these developments, especially in the sub-region of West Africa?
So in the sub-region, especially for us in Ghana, when this year is an election year, we realize that there's a lot of issue about identity when the just ended voter registration exercise that we did. We realized there are people who are being denied the opportunity to register, not because people think they are not Ghanaians, but because people think there are issues with their identity, in terms of maybe the way they look, in terms of their demeanor when it comes to certain things.
But that's a point of contention, because there are Fulanis who have been here for centuries, as some will say, and there are those who are migratory. Sometimes people can't tell the difference, and that is part of the problem, isn't it? So I think one of the chiefs even in there was mentioning.
So the issue is when you see somebody and you feel that the person is not Ghanaian, one of the things we are using this documentary to project is the fact that there are structures and systems one have to go through, and then also there are rules, the Constitution of Ghana, there are rules that identify one as a citizen. So for instance, if my parents have migrated from a certain part of the country or even outside the country and I've been born here, how does my citizenship affect the fact that my parents are not Ghanaians or one of my parents are Ghanaians? So these are the complexities that we are trying to bring people's attention to in trying to understand that because people are migrating due to climate change, no fault of theirs, there are issues coming up that especially policymakers will have to pay attention to. Let me try one more time to engage Dr. Yao Aanu Bafo. He's Senior Research Fellow, Center for Climate Change and Sustainability Studies at the University of Ghana. Doc, good morning.
Hi, good morning. Good morning. Good morning to you, and sorry for the audio issues. I'm happy to be here.
Thanks for joining us. What do you make of this latest documentary, which points to the impact of climate change on the sub-region, especially in respect to migration and everything else that devolves from there? Your initial reaction to this documentary before we get into other salient matters.
All right. Thank you again. Thank you very much. So the documentary is very important, and it's very timely because we are at a point in time where climate change is impacting every facet of our life. And if you look at, northern Ghana especially, where, households or people are directly living on the land, it means that, when it comes to the impact that it's having on people with, extended drought, more flooding, it's going to really cause a lot of harm to households as well as communities. And so the documentary comes at a time where conflict issues also within the sub-region with regards to the Sahel are increasing, and with fight over resources, it's going to be a big problem. So for Ghana, this is a call to action for us to pay attention to the potential impact that climate change, migration, and peace is likely to have within our economy, and especially with the elections around the corner. I think it's important that we pay attention to these issues carefully. So it's a very profound and I think very important documentary that calls us to think carefully about these issues.
Looking at your research and the institute you're with at the University of Ghana, how much of an impact would you say climate change is having on the topic we're discussing, migration and all the other elements in the sub-region?
Right. Well, thank you once again. So if you think about the impact of climate change, the evidence has shown clearly that, since the 1960s, Ghana has been getting warmer, with temperatures going up, let's say, more than 1 degree Celsius, which is quite significant within the context of climate change. And when this is happening, or when this happens, what we are experiencing now is that we are having increased frequencies of extreme events, which is mainly in the case of drought and floods. There's also issues beyond northern Ghana, even in the southern part of our country, where the rising sea levels are affecting many coastal communities that are leading to people to migrate. But if you want to focus on northern Ghana, for instance, flooding and drought and even increasing pests and diseases are leaving people with no choice but to move away from their homes or from their farms and move to new places in search of land or in search of new livelihood systems. And if you think about people who are even staying, what it means is that the competition over resources becomes very intense. And so it brings in the context of Fulanis fighting with local people for grazing land. These are the same lands that local people are cultivating for their basic or daily crops. So it's really it's a big challenge, because if these climate change issues, what I'm talking about, flooding, drought, and pests and diseases, are disrupting agricultural productivity, it can only not bode well for the whole country as a whole as well, because when it comes to food production, we know that a lot of our food production comes from the north as well as, the middle belt. And these areas are the areas that are experiencing the major impact of climate change, which again is driving a lot of people from moving to these, to the urban areas, including Accra, Kumasi, which we know also creates a new set of challenges for many of us, as well as the country as a whole. So I believe that these issues are really profound issues that needs a lot of attention, going forward.
Thank you for those initial comments. Let me come back into the studio, Joyce. So when it comes to migration, how much of an impact or a role does it play in peaceful elections or otherwise? Because that is one of the foundational elements for which you conducted this research.
Yes. So as Doug has said, there is a need for, especially, this documentary was done for young people to understand the impact of climate change in their lives, and also to sort of demand certain inclusive policies from policymakers. So when it comes to climate change, there is a need for us as a country, as Doug has said, to look at all the facets that climate change is affecting. There is food security, there is peace and security, and other things. So how do we make sure that we craft policies that will address these issues? And then these are things that young people especially, and I'll keep stressing on the young people, because for Youth Build Foundation, we think it's important that policies are inclusive of the concerns of young people and they address them ideally. So it's important, this brings us to the discussion, the table, how climate change, it's not just the weather pattern, how these weather patterns, as Doug has said, as they are changing, they are affecting food security, peace and security, even the human security of the people living in various places. So I think climate change needs to be looked at ideally and holistically, not just as the changes in weather.
Let's also look at quickly the economic ramifications of this, because many of these people are moving based on economic factors. They want to survive, then they get into certain places, and then there is tension and all of that. Does it also point to the malaise of leadership failing in the sub-region?
I would say yes and no, because when there are policies and then people do not understand and demand accountability, then these policies are null and void. So I think apart from the leadership responsibilities, citizens also have a role to play in making sure that they are inclusive policies. And that's one of the reasons why we do what we do, to make sure young people especially are in the know of what's going on, and then how they can demand better policies and implementations.
There's also going to be a film that you've put together. Tell us about your call to action. Okay,
so for us, our call to action is for young people to understand the issues and demand accountability. And also we are telling policymakers that there are other facets of the climate menace that we need to address. So we need to really understand how climate change is impacting on young people and address them accordingly.
I see. Dr. Bafo, now we've got this documentary, some research has been done. We've used the Dagombas and the Fulbe or the Fulani as the first subset to examine, but this extends beyond them. Moving forward, what more are you expecting to be done as far as this conversation is concerned, and how it trickles down to even peaceful elections in Ghana?
All right, thank you. I think you put it rightly that beyond the documentary, these issues are manifesting itself in all parts of the country. And so I thought about, for instance, a lot of coastal communities in Ghana. If you go to Anlogra, if you go to Keta, these issues that we are talking about are very, very serious. And so what I think is important is for the country, as well as, different stakeholders, to understand the interconnectedness between humans and environmental systems. If you begin to think, in terms of systems and look at how different aspects of our life are impacted by different actions, I think it will be one very important step in ensuring that we develop more like a very comprehensive climate adaptation and mitigation strategy. Because, once people's livelihood, economic livelihoods are impacted, they begin to find alternatives to to ensuring that they have simple well-being. And I think, as my other guests mentioned, there's a direct relationship between climate change and, let's say, loss of productivity and also income loss. And these are issues that are everyday issues for the Ghanaian. And so if you are a politician and you want to be able to say, come up with a policy, you need to see how you can address some of these basic needs of people so that people don't find themselves in situations whereby it becomes difficult for them to meet their basic needs. And this is an important issue politically also because, it's part of the documentary, peace is not just a matter of words. Peace is based on basic needs. So if you want peace in the country, you need to feed people with their basic needs. And that I think is important because climate change is trying to erode every facet of people's basic needs. So that thinking needs to be put into the discussion. Because even as we are talking about, elections now, I don't think I've heard much about climate change and its impact on people and how, manifestos and so forth are going to address some of these issues. So I think it's very important that we don't overlook these issues and begin to think very systematically as well as holistically.
Dr. Bafo, thank you so much for joining the conversation this morning. We're grateful for your time. Before you go, Joyce, just a quick one. We have to go, but I was just wondering, you collaborated with ONEB, the Embassy of Denmark. What next?
So the next thing is community advocacies. So we've trained young people who are going to lead advocacies to demand for climate resilient agendas in this year's election. So that's what's next on the project.
I see. Thank you very much. So we had Dr. Yao Aanu He, Senior Research Fellow, Center for Climate Change and Sustainability Studies at the University of Ghana. And we also had in the studio Joyce Nyame, Programs Manager, Youth Bridge Foundation. Thank you for the good work.
Thank you for having us.
All right.